Thanks everyone for coming. I'm Sean, and I started a company called Wooj Design, and we design and 3D print lighting from our studio of Berlin, New York. I'm really happy to be here today. I'm actually from Florida, um, but I live in New York now, and so it's good to be back. What I'll cover today, just so you can see what we're going to be talking about, is I think you will enjoy this talk if you're interested in building something from a hobby into a business, what it looks like, how overwhelming that can be, and just a little bit of the story of how I did that and what lessons I've learned along the way. So I started the company about 4 years ago, and since then we've produced and built 50,000 lamps, which is a crazy amount of light of lamps when you consider it in the context of mass manufacturing. But when you consider that it started with one 3D printer in the closet of my apartment, it feels a little more impressive. Stepping back a bit, I didn't get started in design or in business. I actually graduated in the middle of a recession and got a job doing software for banks, which was enormously lucrative for me as a young college graduate. But in terms of what I felt like actually doing with my life, it wasn't really what I wanted to be doing. Luckily for me, at the time, there was a preponderance of hacker spaces, and the maker movement was really situated in San Francisco, where I was located. And so down the street from my office was a place called the Tech Shop, which was this amazing hacker space where you could learn to 3D print and laser cut things. I remember looking around and just being so impressed because it was basically like a gym for makers. You could go use any tool if you learned how to use it, and they would show you how. I was super intimidated by everyone who was there because they seemed to know so many things that I didn't know, but I really didn't have any reason to be intimidated. They were all super, super welcoming, super willing to share their information. And in addition to that, the tech shop itself was a place where you could go and they would teach you all of these things anyways. So I learned how to use a laser cutter, I learned how to use a lathe, I learned how to woodwork, and it really got me started on my journey of making. So it really reminded me of why I had gotten into tech in the first place, which was to make stuff. I viewed technology as a creative and a generative thing rather than what I was doing at the time, which was sort of an extractive thing. And so presumably, those of you here, you're interested in making stuff, hence you're at the Maker Faire. And perhaps some of you have dreams of taking the things that you're making and turning it into something that, you can make a living at. So eventually, my time at the tech shop, I was able to build up a large enough portfolio of little side projects, and I was able to use it to apply to and get into a pretty nice design program in New York. And when I got there, it was really amazing because it was another community of people where just creative people who wanted to build stuff, and they were surrounded by the facilities that enabled them to do it. So it reminded me of the tech shop in that way. Shortly after I applied there, COVID happened, and so that kind of put that all away. So shortly before COVID had happened, I had gone to the Noguchi Museum and bought a lamp from them. And when I got home, I realized it was broken, which was very sad for me because it was quite expensive. But I kind of forgot about it because COVID hit and it went to the very back of my memory. But because COVID had hit, all of our classes went online. All the access to these beautiful studios and workshops was gone. Suddenly I had a whole bunch of time on my hands. And so I used that time to come up with a solution. And so my solution was to use a 3D printer that I had gotten in order to prototype parts for my classes and use it to make a new lampshade for this broken lamp. And so I went through a couple of iterations, modeled it up, and then 3D printed it, and I ended up with this first version of what is now the wavy lamp. So I was pretty happy with it. I thought it was cool. So I posted it online. I got some really good feedback. But the main feedback that I got from people was, hey, could I have one? And I said, no, because I would have to buy and break this really expensive lamp in order to give one to you. So I thought, why don't I try to make it so that I don't have to do that in order to make another lamp? So I bought a bunch of really common parts, really common electrical components, and then set aside some time to build a base that would work for it. And so after a bunch of 3D printing and trying a bunch of different things, I ended up with the wavy lamp, which is now one of our most popular products. At the time, I didn't know that, so I posted it online. I had some friends who wanted to buy it. I sold it to them, and encouraged by all of this, I was able to get the courage to post it online to further strangers and run some ads on it. And all of a sudden, I have some strangers who wanted to buy the lamp. And in fact, I had too many strangers who wanted to buy the lamp. And I was getting a ton of orders for these lamps, which was super amazing. But you know, the thing what happens when people buy something, you know, they want to get it. And so if they want to get it, in order for them to get it, I have to make it and I have to send it to them. So my operation went from just having a single little printer in my closet to having 6 printers take up the front room of my house, and I turned the front room of my apartment into a mini factory. So I was basically, at this point, I was a one-person company. I was taking photos, I was building a website, I was coding, I was packing the boxes. I was perpetually annoying my USPS driver, the number one annoyer of the driver. And so it was really an amazing time. It was also a really terrible time when it was COVID, but also I was still working. I'm juggling my graduate program, and I was juggling my corporate job that I still had. So that winter, for the holidays, I had 150 orders come in a span of about a week. My thesis advisor was like, hey, you're basically failing your thesis. You can ship your lamps to Susie in Kansas when you're done and you graduated. And she wasn't wrong. I was really slipping. My work was also telling me that I was slipping. So it was a really great time. At the same time, it was amazing because I was really just fully engaged in all of this stuff. I was really doing this work and it felt amazing, but I was incredibly, incredibly burnt out and exhausted. Somehow, I made it through that December. I shipped those 150 lamps. I didn't fail my classes, and I kept my job. But that January, my next door neighbor, Sasha, stopped by and said, hey, there's like 1 million packages out front. Did you start a company? Do you need help? And I was like, yes, of course. So we started her off with a training plan, an assembly guide, and soon after that, I was dropping off all of these printed parts literally across the hallway from me. I would leave them at her door. She would just drop in, pick them up, build them, pack them, and she had a window that overlooked the front of the building, so she could see if the USPS truck was coming. So as soon as it would come, we would just scramble down the stairs and with a bunch of boxes and assault our USPS driver, McGann. So this was a really amazing time because finally I had a little bit of help. I was able to finish school. I was able to keep my job because I had help. And this was like a very novel concept for me because I hadn't really worked with other people before. I had always been working on my own, either as a designer or an engineer. I kind of lived solo, so this was a bit of a revelation. I realized that I wasn't just building these lamps anymore, I was kind of building a company. And so that was very exciting for me. Shortly after this, I graduated, and you realized that the apartment factory thing wasn't really going to work for what we wanted to do. So we moved into a studio space. We asked a bunch of people online, and our online community was really helpful and found us this beautiful spot really nearby, 20-minute walk from me. Big windows, and for me at the time, massive space. This was amazing, but what I discovered was that when you rent a space, you have to pay rent. And when you hire people, you also have to pay them, which is somewhat novel when you are really thinking about it the first time. So we had real expenses, and that kind of caught me off guard. So we had a bit of a crisis. We basically ran out of money. We were having issues with our supply chain. We didn't have all the parts we needed. So I was back to waking up in the middle of the night, and instead of changing over the printers in the middle of the night, I was just waking up out of sheer panic and just worry. And so between all that worrying, the marketing, operating the print farm, and trying to solve all the problems of the business, I had zero time to come up with anything new. So we did manage to solve our supply chain issues, but we still didn't have any money. So just out of panic and a desire for true transparency, we basically told our entire online audience that we had this huge problem, and they responded. And basically they turned our worst performing month ever into our best performing month ever. And so don't ever let anyone tell you that you shouldn't ask for help. You should definitely ask for help. But that basically, at that time, turned the company around. But shortly after, you can't read this, but this is my company firing me. And it's redacted anyways, but yeah, so I got fired, and in retrospect, fair on them. They could clearly see that I was building a business and that my work was suffering, so I would have fired me too. Unfortunately, it meant that they had basically been subsidizing our business because I wasn't paying myself at the time. So my business partner and I figured out a plan that I could basically get subsistence wages, which meant I could pay my rent and I could afford beans and rice, as my mom likes to put it. And so we moved on. So they say when one door closes, another door opens. And in my case, the door to having any money closed, but the door to having a bunch of time opened. And so this was a really productive time for me. We worked on some of our most popular products that we have today. The tall wavy lamp, which was just, a tall version of the wavy lamp. The pleat, which was using this digitally modeled fabric. The Arcus, which was using this really crazy woven technique that we designed and developed. And a bunch of other products. And some of those products ended up getting picked up by by MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, which was really incredible. Shortly after that, we had a really important person that we hired, Henya, who started off just doing social media marketing, and then soon after that took over the entire marketing apparatus of our business. So she was telling everyone how to buy our stuff, and then they were listening to her basically. But because of this, we were able to grow a great deal, and we turned her into a partner and an equity holding partner in the business. So that was really, really exciting. Shortly after that, we had another big opportunity where we outgrew our space. We were running out of space, and the company was growing quite a bit. And so we were given another opportunity to occupy a space for trying size. It was also a lot more expensive, but we knew that this was going to be really important and a really big next step for us in building a company into something that we wanted to have. So we were able to develop new products. We had space for them, and even bigger products and bigger lighting designs that we could not have done in our last space. And so one of the things was this lamp, which we designed for a restaurant. And the cool thing about this is that restaurant got written up in the New Yorker, and they drew it in the little cartoon for that piece. So that was really exciting. That's the most famous I'll ever do, I think. So up until this point, we've been using a variety of cobbled together software tools and really, really gnarly spreadsheets. You can't see this, but this is like a 20-line Excel formula that basically ran our whole business. Nothing really worked for us, so we had to do stuff ourselves. And so at this point, I had a ton of trust for my team. I didn't feel like I needed to be wandering over and doing a bunch of stuff. So I was able to go back to my roots as a software developer and build our software. And it really let me dive deep into this kind of development because I didn't have to worry, I didn't have to be looking over my shoulders, and I was really felt confident in my team. So I'm glad that we had two pieces of software to build. One was just like a management system, and the other one was our print farm system. I'm glad I started with the management tool first because it was a way easier thing to do, and I was super, super rusty. But eventually, we ended up building this tool I know this is really boring, but it's super exciting. This is basically running 50 printers now, and then ejecting them, keeping track of the prints, making sure that if they are creating errors or, I don't know, if you've used the 3D printer before, you'll know spaghetti and elephant's foot. If it detects those things, it will stop them, so it saves a whole bunch of time and energy. It's honestly the hardest thing that I've built in this whole time as building this company, and I'm super, super proud of it. But yeah, it looks really boring. Anyways, with all of these things in place, I think the company no longer really feels like this scrappy thing that came out of my closet. It feels kind of like a real manufacturing company. It's small, but it's real. It's still fragile and we're still learning, but it's legit. And I'm not anymore no longer am I trying to do every single thing in the business at the same time. I feel like I'm still doing a lot, but I have all of the support I need to make it happen. Case in point, up until last week, I was still running the print barn. Even with the dual, I was the one in charge of it. And so now, as of last week, we have someone else managing it using Rinky Boy, which is the name of our print pool. And that gave me the time to put this presentation together. So I can also finally put my time back into coming up with what's next for us. And so I guess my takeaway, the whole takeaway from this is it's important to build what you want, but at a certain point you have to let parts of it go so that you can continue to do the things that you want to do. That's really scary and hard for people who are really like tinkering and maker oriented, but it has not that simple. Anyways, that's my talk. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes?
So I'm in a similar position where I'm working on, except just from purely software point of view.
Okay.
My partner and I are working on writing a fairly large piece of software that we want to eventually grow into a business.
Okay.
What advice do you give in that scenario?
So I guess to be a little more specific, like without being like overly specific, but like what are you trying to build?
It's HVAC data analytics.
Okay. So I think what you need to do, there's a couple of ways. Like the way that I approach this business is, I always say that I accidentally started a company because I didn't set out to be anything. I didn't have a business plan. It was like very off the cuff, and I developed a bit of a business acumen as I went along because I had to. So it really depends. Like the first wavy lamp I built for myself, I wanted to have it. It was a problem that I needed to solve. And so in your case, like if this is a problem that you're also trying to solve for yourself, not like I need to start a business, that's the problem, but like the thing that my business is trying to solve is the problem, then I think it makes it easier to start out when you are solving a problem that is explicit and like obvious to you. I wouldn't say that's the best idea necessarily in software because you want to be a little bit more strategic and like figure out like who is your customer. For me, initially, I was my customer, and that's why we had so many problems in the beginning because I actually didn't know who I was selling to. And I would say that that is a big thing that I could have probably resolved much earlier on if I had just had the wherewithal. So I suppose that would be a recommendation I would make.
The specific things I'm solving in my application are, I used to be in the HVAC controls industry for my job. It's problems I've noticed in nearly every single other piece of software in the industry that I'm trying to solve.
Okay. Well, that seems pretty lucrative.
Hopefully.
Yeah, one would imagine. If you are solving the problem, but you'll have to figure out a way to convey that to the buyers, right?
And I have to find, the other thing is the HVAC industry is very tight-knit.
Yeah.
It's hard to get into it if you're not already in it.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's going to be one of the bigger issues.
Yes.
Beyond just writing the software.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be simultaneously validating your ideas and building them, I would say. So wherever you can and where it's possible, if you can put what you're working on in front of someone and have enough information there to convey the thing that you're trying to sell to them, that would be like the first thing I think I would do is like, okay, here's a problem that you have. Here's exactly how it would solve it. And then you could put like $1 amount on how much that saves them.
Okay. Yeah, feedback, nice. Thank you.
Hopefully that's helpful. I don't know if it's...
It does help, yeah.
Okay. Yes?
What would you say your biggest problem was at the beginning phases of starting?
So it was just, I mean, like I mentioned, I think like I was just very overwhelmed with everything at the beginning. It was very, I was learning to do everything. I was basically learning how to do whatever I was like executing in the business as I was doing it because it was all brand new to me. So I think that definitely made things harder. I think there's a saying where you're like, you know, if you're into rail, you're laying the track down in front of the train as you drive the train. And so that's kind of like what I was doing. Or, you know, they say building the airplane wings as you try to fly the plane as well, or putting the, anyways. But that was kind of the biggest challenge was that I couldn't ever look 2-3 steps in front of where I was at the time because I was just like looking straight at the one problem that I had in front of me. And so I think the thing that I learned that was the biggest thing for me was that you have to build in times for you to like look up, step back, and just reflect on the whole thing, and then you can accurately decide like, oh, what is it that I want to do next? Because you're always going to be working, and a lot of times there's just going to be a grind. So you need to figure out like where you want to direct that grind. Yes.
Yes. As of late, I take a greater interest in product design, and I guess my question is, well, I personally deal with like a lot of implications regarding getting a final product, but like my question is essentially how many iterations do you typically go through till you get to your final product, and what do you think makes you different from others that are doing what you do to the point where you get into the moment design store?
Yeah. Good question. So there's 2 questions there. One is like, how do you know enough? Like, how many iterations is enough? And then the other is like, what makes it different enough that it's like in moment, I guess. And so I think the first question is, I kind of tend to decide enough is enough, like very arbitrarily, if I'm being perfectly honest. For instance, the Arcus, which is this guy over here. The first version of that I took like months to work on, and I would say that I took a little too long. But it became one of our, I mean, it is actually our best-selling product today, and so that time was well spent. But if I was always under time pressure with all of these things because it was like, we need to come up with a new idea so that we get like more audience and like people buy it. But with that one, it basically failed at first. And I was like, okay, that was way too many iterations because it didn't matter. And then in subsequent launches and subsequent things that I developed, sometimes I would be like, here's an idea, 1 iteration, I'm like, ship it, let's go, it's good, it's done. And so I go between that because sometimes I think like sometimes an ideal is marinating in your head for a really, really long time. And sometimes it just comes out, especially if you've been doing other stuff. It's like, boop, you're like fully formed, it's ready to go. And sometimes it's like you're just fighting it. You're like fighting to make it real and fighting to survive. And so I don't have a good answer there. I think I feel when it's enough, and sometimes I'm wrong, but I think it's kind of like I hate to say it, but it's sort of a vibes thing. I'm like, okay, it feels good. I don't have like a checklist there. The second question, in terms of like, I guess what I think makes us different. I don't know that a lot makes me different. I think I have a background that is sort of cross-disciplinary. I've always been interested in like the engineering and the code side of things, but I've also been very, very interested in the design and aesthetic side of things. And for a long time, I think that made me a very hard fit for a variety of places. So for instance, when I worked in software development, I was like too interested in the artistic side of things, and they were like, okay, it's just numbers, man, like just do this thing. And I was like, but it doesn't look good. And so I think that made it tough, that actually having done this, like I created a business that was like perfectly suited for my temperament and my interests. And so in that way, it just feels like I'm doing something that was like made for me to do. Like I'm using all of my strengths in this forum. And so I guess like my point there is I think anyone with a particular set of attributes, as long as they put themselves in a position where they're like utilizing them all to the best of their ability, they can get that level of accomplishment. But the difficult thing is, I think oftentimes it's a long road to find out what that thing is. And so that's what I guess a long-winded answer to say, like, I don't think that I'm doing anything special compared to someone else, but it's just that this thing is like super special to me.
Oh. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so it's incredible, like the story how you go from like the one lamp to all these different designs, and the tipping point is like losing the job and now having the time to do them.
Yeah.
So necessity is the mother of invention, right? Like
Yeah.
you now have the time to build things, like you're building it with a new urgency that was there before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, how, like, what was the decision there? Like, you know, other people might have said, this is a side thing, let me just fall back and find another job. What caused you to say, I'm going to double down on this and put it, like, everything into it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think to some degree there's like pain and like joy, and so behind me I think that there was like a lot of pain. Like I was thinking, if I have to go back, if I have to shut this down and go back to just being a consultant for financial service companies, I will die. So I didn't want to go back to that. And on the other side, it was sort of I know that I'm enjoying this. I know that this is like engaging me in a number of ways. And even though doing that sometimes can also be painful in its own way, and all the associated things around it can be painful, just the feeling, even sometimes I would say even the just occasional feeling of that spark of, oh my God, like we're making something, it's real, like this thing that just sparked something in my mind, and I knew that that was worth it to me. And I will say that it's not just always worth, like sometimes I'm like, this is not worth it, like I don't want to do this, this is crazy, I can't believe I'm like sacrificing all this stuff to do this. But I've gotten through most of those things, and so I think there are periods of time where you don't know that that's true, and it's like a weaker impulse. So you really have to fight through those periods because you don't know. Like now I know I've already overcome some of those things like a couple times, and so I'm like, oh, I could do that again. Like if something hard happens, I can do it again. That's fine. I now know that, but at the time I didn't, and so I had to just basically take a leap of faith. I didn't know that it was gonna work. Cool. Well, unless there's any other questions, I thank you all for listening.